All right, we're live, I
We're
think.
live. Oh
Yeah.
boy,
How are you?
Showtime.
Showtime.
Um, it's great. It's cold here in New York, so happy.
76 degrees here in Houston.
Yeah. Okay, but let's fast forward 6 months, and then you'll wish you were me.
Oh no, it'll be and in a month and a half it'll be
Yeah.
100.
So yeah. So that's that. I'll take cold versus hot and humid any day.
Yeah. Well, Michael, let's talk about AI adoption within commercial departments.
Yes.
You've been working with hotels.
Yes.
You've got kind of a plan. It's a pretty interesting plan to help with adoption. Why don't we start off with some of the insights you have on you start off with a cross-departmental workshop, help kick everything off. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So, but even before I do that, I do have a 5-step process, like to keep it simple. Start with a workshop, go into task force, do use case AI policy, go assessment, and then go to pilot. So that's sort of the 5-step. But I think even before that, even before the task force happens, even before the workshops, one of the things I think is really important for commercial leaders to do, because as I've dealt with some of these projects, is they're just not using the technology. When I say using the technology, is getting in there, and as they have situations or working through something, just see how the technology, the AI, can help them. Because as they become more comfortable with it, then they can say, okay, well, here's some of the opportunities that are available to us. But so that's number one. But so these workshops, so I start with a workshop, and typically it's about 4 hours. And this workshop is comprised of several parts. It is an education, it is a training, and almost somewhat of a coaching as well. So I think it's important to hit all parts of this in a workshop, because how I run it is I invite the leaders of the organization. It's the leaders of marketing, leaders of revenue, leaders of distribution, leaders of sale, leaders of HR, and leaders of ops. And it's important to bring everybody in and do an education session, because everyone has different levels of understanding, experience, and expectation and fear. And I think fear is the biggest challenge for a lot of people, because they've heard about some of these, you know, terrible situations where financial information gets out or proprietary information gets out. And so they also are somewhat comforted by the fact the organization just says no. So they're like, okay, well, I don't have to do that. So I think it's important to kind of get everyone level set, understand what they can and can't do with this technology, and really kind of get over, because there's another thought that goes along with this. It's the fear, but then there's the other thing that people have, which is they feel it's cheating. And what do I mean by that? A lot of people feel by using this technology to do their job faster is cheating, in that it, for some reason, because it feels like that, it's wrong. And so what I say to them is this: imagine if I gave you an assignment that's due tomorrow, and you don't have the time to do it. So you're going to delegate it. Delegation is good. You delegate it to someone who works on your team. They come back to you. You review it, then you give it back to me, and you make sure it's all right. You might go back and forth a couple of times for corrections. That's the same thing with this technology. So that's the other thing, is I try to get them over the concept that it's cheating, as well as the fear. And that's really the goal of this workshop, because coming out of the workshop, we're ready to start to do the work. And so that is just sets a strong foundation to move forward.
You mentioned task force. Talk to us about the task force. What is that?
All right. So after you kind of have a level understanding, you have to create a task force. And what does the task force do? A task force is really almost like the advisory committee for AI. So you need to have people from each department: marketing, revenue, sales, HR, ops, and you need to have people of different levels as well. So you don't want to have just all executives. But one of the things I did learn from doing some of my projects is you don't want people to have to be voluntold to join this task force.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to want to be part of the task force, because someone who is not engaged and told to do it is not going to really drive the input. But just because someone's on the committee doesn't mean that they've drank the AI Kool-Aid. Actually, it's actually pretty good to have almost a contrary perspective as well, to really kind of make sure that you don't get groupthink as well. Because I think groupthink with AI is also a scary thing. Like everyone's like, oh, it can do this, oh, it can do this, oh, it can do this. I think that you need a bit of reality as well as when you're going through that. So that's what the task force does. The task force is really understanding, is the one that's going to be driving the AI adoption, the AI policies for the organization, and making sure that everything the organization does going forward meets expectations for the company.
So I guess you've come across people that were voluntold.
Yeah, so I come across people who are voluntold, and really the challenge with the voluntold people is always like, why? Why are we doing this? Why? And they keep asking why, because they're looking for a reason for themselves to justify how they can get off of it. And some people just remove themselves, and then you have a gap where you expect them to do something and they just disappear. Or other ones that are just sort of they're slow and they're not quick. Because one of the things I learned through going through this project, and we were just talking about this earlier before we went live, is how projects are run. And when I was doing project management, when I was at Starwood, building out Sheridan.com, luxurycollection.com, internationally the sites, we followed a very kind of robust sort of software development lifecycle where everything is very gated and one thing needs to finish before you start the next one. But now this AI, it's so fast. You have to be like ultra agile. You have to be so fast, run everything so concurrently, that somebody that is just slowing up the works, someone that's not engaged, someone that's not driven to the mission, is kind of impact the overall project and the overall initiative.
So is so you start off with this workshop cross-departmental, and I would imagine it's a bunch of people in a room. In that
Yes.
room, you're trying to identify the task force, right? And you and the hotel leadership that brought you in is like you're probably on
Well,
the lookout, right?
yeah. So the task force actually shouldn't come from me. It shouldn't come from someone outside the company. It should come from within. It should be people volunteering to step up. Say, here's this opportunity. We're looking for people from each of these departments to step up. So you want people to volunteer, because it is a volunteer exercise. And once they feel the pressure from the commercial leader to say, you need to join this, essentially that's being voluntold to join. And then that's the challenge. So you have this weird dance of who's going to join the task force. Typically, the task force fills up pretty quickly. You just don't want the task force to be too big, because once it's too big, then it comes to scheduling nightmare. Everyone's so busy. To get everybody to have time to meet for 30 minutes is a challenge. So you want to keep it somewhat lean, but you want to have multiple people from each department on the task force. And these are people that really are ultimately, they may not be vested in, say, AI, which is fine, but they're ultimately vested in what's the best interest of the company. And so those are the people you want on here to try to figure out ways to do things better, faster, drive more revenue, make people more productive, and reduce costs. Find that maybe AI can do this, but maybe there's other solutions that can do this as well. But that's part of the task force also, to kind of guide this whole process.
Okay, so there's a workshop, there's a task force, and then there's a AI policy discussion. Talk
Right.
to me
So
about that.
then, yes. So the task force, and we branched to two things. So we come up with policy, because that's one of the big purposes of this task force, is what is the policy for the organization? What can people always do with this technology? What are things that people can sometimes do? And what are things that people can never do? So once you kind of identify that for the organization, then it goes to the next level of say, okay, so what are the list of tools? You want to have a list of tools that are approved. And then you also have to have one person that is ultimately responsible for this. So when tools come up or when people want to be added to a tool or someone wants to be trained, they need to go through this one person. So there's one role, this one individual is responsible to making sure that policies around AI, people are educated, and there's the level of compliance. So that's number one. So the second part of the task force is, this is where it expands, where we work through use cases. So I work through, for a recent project, I had about 200 use cases per department. And the reason there were 200 use cases, which is, a lot, is because this organization was brand as well as hotel level. So it was corporate and hotel, it was brand, and it was independent. And then you also had different levels of people on that were working through it. So I wanted to think through all the various permutations of the use cases that they might find. So that's the other thing the task force took a look at. I showed them the list, and then we assigned out to people with each of the departments to kind of fill out these use cases.
And so what about the company policies? I mean, is that part of the company policies, or are you expanding beyond that
Oh,
when you're talking about company
so
values and objectives?
right. So the policy, back to that. So the AA policy. So what I did was the task force. I got various examples of different policies that are out there from different types of organizations. So that were different from their company, so they can kind of look at how it was structured. This typically also the company has a lawyer that kind of generates their own policy. So you compare and contrast and make sure that you understand the various components, and then ultimately they provide feedback until they finally vet the ultimate policy and bring it back to their attorneys.
What about like a departmental review process? Departments evaluating AI use cases for their respective areas. What's that look like?
So what it looks like is, so as I was saying before, you came up with these various use cases, and it goes to them. And what I then do is walk them through the various use cases. So you have the use cases, but then you have lots of different ways that these use cases can manifest themselves. So first thing is, because it's such a big list, I'm like, do you do this? If you don't do this, who does? And then are there any outside partners? So what I want to do for each of these use cases when I talk about with the departments is sort of really understand, is this relevant to them? Then if it is relevant, I just ask them a series of additional questions. Do they use AI in this? If so, how so? And then I come up with also the workflow questions for them, like what happens before this task and what happens after this task. So that's the next phase of them kind of evaluating these use cases. And then the third step of this is I ask them, okay, you've done this, you identified what comes before, what comes after this. What does success look like when this use case is done? And then what does failure look like? And then list all the tools that they use to do this. So that way we can kind of understand not the workflow, but then what is the best case scenario and what are the worst case scenarios and what are the tools that get them there. And then the last step, which is the most important in terms of AI, which is I take them through what is the task priority, what is the skill level of this task, and then I ask a series of questions regarding automation. Is this repetitive? Is this a repetitive task? Does it require analysis? Does it create something new? And then the big one here, really for me, is the frequency of this in terms of days, weeks, months, and then how many hours it typically takes. Because with this last bit of questions, it really allows me to understand what can be automated in terms of the overall use cases.
So before we keep going, I want to encourage anyone that's with us to ask a question while we've got Michael here. Earlier you were talking about bigger projects, smaller projects. I mean, any size hotel or hotel organization with multiple hotels can take on AI, in a measured way, like you've kind of outlined. I mean, talk to us a little bit about small orgs, large orgs?
Yeah, so as I've done this, I think there are two ways to approach this. There's sort of the top-down approach, which I talked about with that methodology of 5 different steps. But I think another way, probably that is probably more relevant for more hotels or smaller to mid-sized organizations, is you just bring in and look at the use cases that impact the different departments. So instead of going through this whole sort of comprehensive look, just so you can get started. Because I think really right now, the most important thing is to get comfortable with the technology, is to look department by department, look at the various use cases that you say, hey, look at the last bit of questions in which I shared earlier. Is it repetitive? Does it require analysis? Does it create something new? And look at those in terms of time. And go department by department, and then see which of those that you can kind of peel out into a project and really pilot the technology. But what I think is really important, if you don't do a comprehensive approach, you definitely need to have the glue. And what I mean by the glue is you need to have a person, a role that actually is aware of what marketing is doing, what sales is doing, what revenue management doing, and what HR is doing, because you want to have that level of compliance, and you also want to make sure that people there's a level of consistency. And I think consistency is really important, and also educating people where some certain teams are not as strong. You want to have that role or that person, educate them to bring everyone up to the same level, because ultimately you want to kind of do a comprehensive approach, but in the interim, you just want to kind of do it department by department, but you want to have a person that is there that is coordinating with HR, sales, revenue, and marketing.
What do you think the biggest mistake organizations can make? Like, what's the number one thing?
I think the number one mistake is to wait.
Yep.
How I look at this is like it's a race. And you can hold back your organization and wait at the starting line, and you can stifle your employees while your competition is already out there running, and they're not only getting the productivity gains, the revenue gains, the savings, the cost, they're also getting the experience and the technology, and they're able to do this while you're still waiting. And so I think waiting is probably the biggest mistake an organization can do. I think what they need to do is identify what are they feel is the low risk, highly feasible areas where they can go for it. And I think marketing is a no-brainer. Marketing is definitely an area that every company can do right off the bat, leveraging this technology. So I think waiting is number one. So I think that would be, to me, the biggest mistake. But I think a lot of it has to do with fear. I think a lot of it also is there's uncertainty. Every day there's something new, and it really can be intimidating, can be overwhelming. Like Google just announced a huge thing just yesterday, and this isn't even the Sora video, which kind of like text to video, where it's like so lifelike, it's incredible. But now for example, ChatGPT, it can put in basically what Google just did. They announced the other day is they are increasing the amount of context. So what you do is what you can type into the chat window. That's called the context window. So right now the maximum for ChatGPT is 128,000. Google just announced 1 million. So what does that mean? What is 1 million? It basically means that there's 1,700 pages of information it can process and remember. And now, why is this important? This is important because if those of you have used ChatGPT and the hallucinations, which we hear so much about, that it usually has to do with, and I'm not talking about doing research papers, but actually we're working on stuff that you feed into it. It only has a certain amount of memory before it starts to hallucinate. But now with this new version of Google that came out, so you have 1,700 pages of which it will has a very reduced amount of hallucinations, which means that the information that it produces can be substantially more accurate. And Google said, okay, they have this million, 1,007, a million tokens, which is about 1,700 pages, soon to be 10 million. So just that kind of constant back and forth between OpenAI and Google in terms of always doing something new, I think it's intimidating. And I think it's sort of like, well, we don't know where to start. I'm just going to wait until I have to do something. So I think that companies should just get in there and just expose themselves to it and learn and try to find a way to stay up to date.
A lot of buzz in the marketplace, but you talk to hotels all the time. You're part of HSMAI. Are you getting a sense that certain companies aren't waiting? Like they're going.
Yeah, I think the more independent boutique hotels are moving forward. I think the more luxury hotels are moving faster. But I also think that they're two different parts, right? There's the back of house, is the marketing, the revenue, do the teams use it, or is it guest facing? So the guest facing piece is a little more trickier because just the other day, Air Canada was held liable by the courts to basically their chatbot gave an incorrect refund policy. And Air Canada tried to challenge that, but the courts upheld the fact that you got to do what the chatbot says because that's representation of the company. So I think that stuff like that, when you hear information like that as to, the chatbot's giving incorrect information and you're being responsible for it, that kind of has a chilling effect. And it scares, like, who wants to be responsible for this chatbot where it's just you train it on your information, but then it kind of says something incorrectly and now you're on the hook for it. So you might as well just, stick with your call agents. But the call center agents, while good, it's costly and there's a hold time and it might be more ineffective and it's not 24/7 necessarily, or not on demand. So I think finding a way to for hotels to kind of get comfortable to do the BDC component, to kind of have that outward facing where they can trust their information, as well as internally, what are the ways to do that? What are ways to run reports so you can use the technology and not leak it out to the world? Like, what are the ways to do load in your P&L and ask it some questions? What are some ways to load in all your analytics and ask, okay, well, how can I do this? Or load in your pickup or your pace or all this other stuff and do your forecasting. What are the ways to do that? And you can do that and you can do it safely. You just need to know how to do it to really reap the gains, the productivity gains. And really, when I was looking through these use cases for companies I've been doing the use cases for, and the biggest time suck invariably is pretty much 5 different things. And the 5 different things are meetings, which is no surprise there. It's meetings, it's doing strategy, it's doing reports, it's working with your team, and it's doing competitive analysis. Now, I would argue the most important thing there is working with your team. So if you can automate those other pieces so you can focus more time on developing and growing your team to be a good manager, then that is huge and that is significant. So finding ways to do those other things faster, where it gets you about 70% of the way there, so you just have to do the last 30%, that's a win in my terms.
2 or 3 weeks ago, you came out with a book.
Oh, yes.
How's that doing?
It's fun. You know what? Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to write a book. So, it's interesting. I wrote the book because I was, when I was learning about prompt engineering and learned that you have to give it a role, like act as a copywriter, act as a salesperson, act as, blah, blah, blah. And I realized that you can make it, give it this persona and you can give it this level of skills and expertise, and it will persist throughout the chat. And you can even name it. You can name it Jason the CMO. Then you can even create another character, another persona, which is a CFO that could persist in the chat, and a CEO and a CFO. And all of them can persist with a level of expertise where then in this chat, you can then ask them questions that are facing you and your organization. And you can even have them challenge each other. And when I discovered this and I was explaining this to people, people didn't really understand what the heck I was talking about. So I'm like, I'm going to write it down. So I wrote it down. So that's the book. So
Cool. And the book, you can get the book on Amazon.
you can get the book on Amazon. Too Many Hats, Too Little Time. That's what it's called.
And if anyone wants to talk with you about AI adoption, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Just direct message you on LinkedIn or what?
Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. Go to my company website, vivanderadvisors.com. We're the only Vivander out there, so it's easy to find us.
You can go to Gain as well.
And, that's right, Gain.
We'll connect
Gain as
you with
well.
Michael.
Yes, that's right. That's Gain as well. Gain Advisors.
Multiple ways to get a hold of Michael. So
that's right. That's right.
So don't wait. That's what I heard. Don't wait. Get in there. All right. Well, Michael, I appreciate your time. This was good, and we'll talk again soon.
All right.
All right,
this
sir.
was I always enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a great topic. I love it. All right, sir.
Yeah. Okay.